me, sir, are you Job? Yes, my name is Job. Are you the Job? The one whose life was a series of tragedies and suffering. Your children all died. You lost your health. You lost your business. Everything gone. No, I'm afraid you have me confused with someone else. I was incredibly blessed. My wife and I had 14 sons and 6 beautiful daughters. We did have a prosperous household. Yes, there was an awful day of loss. 7 of my sons and 3 of my daughters died in a horrific microburst. Nearly all of my employees were lost in 3 separate unexpected catastrophes. I was painfully stricken for a time, but that was long ago. I lived over 140 years after that. God blessed us with 7 more sons and 3 more daughters. He provided abundantly for our family. I got to see my great-great-grandchildren born. I don't believe I've hardly met anyone more blessed than I was. How do you view Job's life? Was he blessed or cursed? How do you view your life? What does it mean to be a blessed person? If we take the position that Job could have been written by Moses, we might benefit from going back to Genesis to see how those terms are used at the very beginning. In their first context, Genesis, the first chapter. Remember, God created a man and a woman, and God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and multiply." God blessed Adam and Eve. What does it mean to be blessed? Genesis 2, verse 3, God blessed the Sabbath, made it holy. What does blessing represent? Wouldn't it represent, in a sense, living God's ideal? Life, ultimately, life? God blessed them and said, "Live and multiply." What does it mean to be cursed? You don't have to go too far in Genesis chapter 3. Genesis 3, after Adam and Eve ate that fruit that was forbidden, what did God do? Verse 14 of Genesis 3, God cursed what? The serpent. Cursed the serpent and said, "You're going to live on the ground now. You're going to eat dust. You're going to crawl." And then God cursed the ground, the serpent and the ground. Did God curse the man and the woman? No, God did not. What does it mean to be cursed? It would seem from this context, it means you experience the results of sin, which ultimately leads to what? Death, ultimately. So blessing leads to life, God's ideal. Cursing leads to death, separation from God. So if we're blessed, we won't have problems, right? There is a difference between being cursed and experiencing the results of the curse. We live in a sinful world, so we all experience the results of that. In Matthew, the 5th chapter, Jesus said, "Blessed are those who are persecuted." Blessed are the ones who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. Blessed are those who mourn. So you can mourn and still be blessed. Experiencing loss and suffering does not mean we're not blessed. Jesus would be a wonderful example of this. Was Jesus blessed? He was the blessed one. In Luke, the 1st chapter, Elizabeth said to Mary, Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the one who will be born to you. The fruit of your womb. Was Jesus blessed? Indeed, he was blessed. Was Jesus cursed? Did he experience the curse of sin? Absolutely, he did. Paul writes that he became sin for us. On the cross, it did not seem to those who were passing by that Jesus was blessed. Looking at someone hanging on a cross would not seem like they were experiencing the good favor of God. It didn't appear he was living life more abundantly. It didn't seem like God was putting a protective hedge around him. But often things are not what they seem or what they appear to be. And keep that word be in mind. So was Jacob blessed? Let's review from Job, the first chapter, a few thoughts from Job this morning. Focus especially on chapters 1 and 2. But thinking of Job chapter 1, we read that Job lived where? Land we don't know too much about, the land of Uz. And he was a perfect and upright man, one who feared God and eschewed evil. Does this sound like a positive description of a man? He was perfect and upright. He was an exceptional person. It reminds me a little bit of the description in the first chapter of Luke about Zacharias and Elizabeth. They were righteous before God, blameless according to the law. That's a pretty high standard. Job was an exceptional person. He feared God. Is that what we're called to do? According to Revelation 14, we are to fear God and give glory to him. Did Job do that? He feared God, and I think he gave glory to him, as we find in the rest of the story about Job. He was fulfilling God's purpose for his life. He feared God. Job lived in the land of Uz, and unto him and his wife were born 7 sons and 3 daughters. So how did he end up with 14 sons and 6 daughters? You have to read the last chapter of Job to find that out. But this is before that time came. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. And we read in verse 5, Job chapter 1, and it was so, when the days of their feasting were come about, that Job sent and sanctified them and rose up early in the morning and offered burnt offerings. Why did he do this? For Job said, it may be that my sons have sinned and have cursed God in their hearts. Thus Job did continually. If you read the intervening verses, you find out that his children would get together and feast. And Job would be concerned for his children. Isn't that any parent concerned for their children, wanting the best for them? And Job says, it may be that my sons have sinned in their heart. It was a bit tentative. But he recognized that his perspective was limited. He didn't know what was in their heart. Do you know what was in their heart? We don't know what was in their heart. Job said, it may be. And so I want to ask God for my children. Forgive them. Guide them. Job had the concern of every parent for their child. Notice verse 7 of Job 1. The Lord said to Satan, where do you come from? There was a meeting going on in heaven, and Satan showed up. And Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. Where does Satan spend his time? this earth, going to and fro in this earth. Did you know that God also goes to and fro in this earth? We read in 2 Chronicles 16 that the eyes of the Lord run to and fro. What is God looking for? He's looking for people. What is Satan doing when he goes to and fro in this earth? Isn't he looking for people? I think so. So when God asked Satan, "What are you doing down there?" It seems to me Satan was saying, "Well, I'm doing what you're doing. I'm looking for people." Of course, it's a very different motivation between what God is looking for and what Satan is looking for. I'm thankful that God is motivated by love as he's looking to and fro. Could that give us a little more understanding of what's happening in Daniel, the 12th chapter, where we read in verse 4 that at the end of time, men run to and fro, and knowledge is increased. What are they doing running to and fro? Could it be that they are looking for people to tell about what's going on? Knowledge will be increased. Some, I've heard anyway, say, well, running to and fro in the end, that's, wow, transportation is just amazing. There are airplanes. Wow, isn't this amazing? No horse and buggy. But from a biblical context, could we suggest that running to and fro is getting around looking for people? And in the end, isn't that what it boils down to? Satan is frantically trying to get his campaign going. And God is frantically working through people to find other people, to increase the knowledge about the time of the end. Knowledge will be increased as the end nears. God is going to and fro, and Satan is likewise doing that. Notice Job chapter 1, verse 11. We read what Satan suggests that God do to Job. Satan says, "Put forth your hand now and touch all that Job has, and he will curse you to your face." Satan said, "You have put a hedge around him. You have blessed the work of his hands. But take that away, and he will curse you to your face." Wow. Job, in thinking about his children, was a bit tentative. He said it may be in their heart that they're not right with God. I don't know. But Satan made a rather bold accusation here about Job's heart. Was he right? Was Satan right? Did Job curse God to his face? He did not. Satan, in accusing Job and citing the motivation in his heart, was wrong. Did God allow bad things to happen to Job? Notice verse 16, chapter 1 of Job. While he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, "The fire of God is fallen from heaven and hath burned up the sheep, servants, and consumed them, and I alone am escaped to tell thee." What was the mindset of people at the time? If something bad happens, this fire comes, where is it coming from? Must be an act of God. Was it an act of God? Who was bringing trouble on Job? Satan was bringing trouble. But we have a long history in this earth of blaming God, don't we? Fire of God fell from heaven. We read about a time in the end, Revelation 13, where fire comes down from heaven, and people think that it's who? They think that it's God. And they are sadly mistaken. They are mistaken in the end. Fire of God. Well, God did send fire down on the sacrifice in Elijah's day. But it says there that was fire from God out of heaven, not just out of heaven. Important detail. Here we find in chapter 1 the unraveling of Job's life. These messengers come. Your business is destroyed. Your children have died. And what did Job do? Did he say, God, why? Why have you let this happen to me? We read in verse 20, Job arose, rent his mantle, shaved his head. He fell down upon the earth and worshiped. Imagine that. He worshiped. And he said, naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. He worshiped. Isn't that what we're called to do? Fear God, give glory to him, worship him. Because everything's going great? Not necessarily. Job would say, no, worship him, fear him, trust him. Verse 21, he said, blessed be the name of the Lord. He used good words in referring to the Lord. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Job was an exceptional person. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Notice Job chapter 2. Once again, there's a gathering in heaven, and Satan repeats his same spiel. Where did you come from? Oh, I'm doing what you're doing. I'm looking for people. I'm going to and fro. And verse 3, Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There's no man like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man. He hasn't changed a bit with all this trouble you've brought on him. One who fears God and escheweth evil, and still he holdeth fast his integrity. Although thou movest me against him to destroy him without cause. Without cause. If you consult your Santa Biblia, it will say sin causa there. Without cause. Without cause. Why was Job going through this? Was it because of something he had done? Or not done? No. No. So many people have the faulty idea that in this world you get what you deserve. Do something bad, get a bad result. Yeah. I remember hearing that concept from someone. Someone had just gotten off at their trial from something that they'd been accused of doing. And then, what do you know? They went on a ski trip and skied into a tree. And this lady said, see, God will get you. Yeah. Got out of the trial, but was she right? Sometimes in this world, things happen that appear to be without cause. Because not all scores are settled in this world. Without cause, Job was going through this. It wasn't because he was a bad person. It wasn't because he was too good a person. It was because there was a great controversy going on. And Satan had said, withhold your blessing from Job, and he will curse you to your face. That's a pretty strong accusation to make. He makes that accusation here again in verse 5. He will curse you to your face. Just touch his person. So he didn't care about his employees, he didn't care about his kids, but make him sick. He'll curse you. Was Satan right? No, he was not right. Satan asserts that he knows what motivates Job. And when we boldly assert or claim to know what is motivating someone, are we acting more like Job or more like Satan? Now, I can see what someone's doing. I think I can see what they're doing. But do I know what their heart is? No, I do not. Have you ever been reading something and your hair started to curl? Or you were listening to something, a conversation, and you heard these accusations against someone in business or government or even the church. Some accusation, and you think, wow, that's pretty bold to say that. My, you don't even know that person. Wow. Well, these folks have apparently connected the dots, and they know what's going on. Why, it's obvious, isn't it? Of course. They can see, but things are not always as they appear to be. Remember that word, be. As I've shared not so long ago about someone from this church family responding to a service call. A lady called up and had a swarm of bees in her attic. Could you help me? Sure, we'll come. We'll take care of that for you. Maybe you know something about attics. But I suppose attics in Arizona would tend to be dusty places, generally. So you wear some rather scuzzy clothes when you're going into someone's attic. And you might even wear something on your hands and even over your face, because not all bees are friendly. Even though bees do wonderful work, some of them can be rather protective of their space. So what do you do to calm the bees down when you're gathering them up? Well, typically you smoke them. They're disoriented and they calm down, and you can gather them into your bag or your box, whatever. You collect them, and then what did our friend do? Well, he climbed down from the attic, and there was no gate to the front yard. And you really hate to go through people's house when you've just come out of this dusty, smoky environment. So what did he do? He hopped over the back wall, and there was a vigilant neighbor on duty who knew that when you see something, you say something. Yeah. You call up and you report this kind of activity. Yeah, I just saw him. Yeah, over the wall. Yeah, he was taking that. Yeah. Well, what do you know? It's been my experience that when you need law enforcement right away, it doesn't always happen. But for some reason, law enforcement was right close. And before our friend got very far, they were behind him. He had barely gotten out of his car at the corner Quick Mart. He wanted to go in and get something to drink after sweating it out in the attic. And these cars pull up behind him. And he gets out to go into the Quick Mart, and this officer comes with a drawn gun and says, "Put your hands up, get down." What have I done? You know what you've done. Whoa. Whoa, you know what you've done. Wow. Where's that bag? Oh, well, it's in there. What's in the bag? Bees. So the officer goes over and lifts up the bag and uses some logic, listens for the bees. And what are they saying? Nothing. Because they're still smoked. Well, you could look in the bag, but I wouldn't recommend doing it in an hour or so. But, well, eventually the truth began to come out. But what about that neighbor who saw what was happening with their own eyes? Did our church friend take something from that woman's house? Yes. Took the bees and went over the back wall with them. Were they stealing from her? No. They were actually providing a service that they were getting paid for. We think we know what we see because we see it. It's obvious, right? Let's not try to work Satan out of a job. Let's allow him to be the accuser. Jesus did indict the religious leaders in Matthew 23 for what they were doing. But there is a difference between Jesus and me. There are several differences, but one difference is Jesus knew people's hearts. He knew their thoughts. He knew their motivations. We only see to a degree, and our eyes can be deceived. In 2 Thessalonians, the 2nd chapter, there comes a time at the end when people say, "Oh, that one sitting on the throne, that one displaying such power is obviously who? Obviously God. Obviously, has to be. But it couldn't be further from the truth. Because who's sitting on the throne is the antithesis of all that is true. Philippians, the 4th chapter, says, whatsoever things are, what does it list first? Are true. True. Whatsoever things are lovely, praiseworthy, whatsoever things are of good report. Think on these things. Focus on these things. Satan said about Job, he will curse you to your face. I know what's in his heart. And Satan was wrong. Do you suppose Satan has watched people enough to be a little better judge of people than we are? And if Satan is wrong, then maybe we should be a bit humble about thinking we know exactly what's going on in people's hearts at times. Job chapter 2 continues, verse 11. There comes a time when 3 friends come to visit Job. And I've heard people be quite critical of these friends. All they did was talk, talk, talk. Why, the next 13 chapters. Talk, talk, talk. Is that what Job needed? But have they read verse 13 of Job chapter 2? These friends came and sat down on the ground 7 days and 7 nights. And what did they say? They spoke not a word. Not a word. For they saw that his grief was very great. When you were grieving, did anyone come and sit down for 7 days and 7 nights and not say a word? It seems to me they were trying to show some understanding to Job. Now, eventually they were trying to talk it through, but they were silent for a week. They were just there. Job's grief was great, and they were trying to understand. How long did Job's testing time last? How long was it between the time he got the news about his employees and his livestock and his animals and his kids? How long was it? It all happened on the same day. The same day. And then there was another meeting in heaven at some point, we don't know exactly, when Satan said, okay, that didn't bring him down, but if his health is gone, that will bring him down. How long did Job have boils and sickness? Do we know? Don't know exactly. How old was Job when he lost his children? How old was he when he got married? We don't know. But in those days, lifespans were a little longer than they are today. If we were just arbitrary and said, okay, well, say you got married when he was 40. How long would it take Job to have 10 children and have at least 7 of them grow up and have their own homes? If you had your kids pretty close together, it would still take some time, wouldn't it? Wouldn't he have had to have been at least 70 when this happened to him? How long did Job live after this happened? Job 42 records he lived 140 years after either having more children or after having this ordeal. I don't know exactly how long Job suffered, but I would suggest it probably wasn't years and years and years. I'm not trying to downplay the sorrow and grief that he experienced over the death of his children. That would be with him forever. But how long did he suffer? I would imagine that this period of loss and physical suffering was fairly limited. If he lived over 200 years and he had 6 months or a year of terrible suffering, was he blessed or cursed? It would seem to me that Job led a blessed life. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters after all of the bad things happened to him. And he had twice as many livestock as he had before. He had approximately 11,000 animals before he lost them all. If we said, just for example, that each one was worth $100, if he had 11,000 in his herd, what would that be worth? Well, that would be worth $1,100,000. After he was blessed again at the end of the book, he had twice as many livestock as before. So he would have gone from 1.1 to 2.2. Well, we say that doesn't go too far these days. Maybe not. But Job had, it would seem, enough for his needs. He had a house and a family. Job was blessed. And Job had the wonderful privilege of being true to God. Because at the end of the book, Job chapter 42, God says to Job's friends, what Job has said about me is right. What Job has said is right. Wouldn't that be quite a commendation for God to say about you, what Pete has said about me is right? Wow. Wow. Eulogeo means good words. What better words could we imagine than those in Matthew 25? Come ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you. What does that mean? Inherit the kingdom prepared for you. Isn't that talking about living life with God? A blessing that ultimately leads to life. Life. And in that same passage, Matthew 25, there are these words, depart from me, you cursed. Cursed. Where does that lead? To death. To death. Adam and Eve were not cursed, but in the end, those who aren't blessed are cursed. They're cut off from life. At that time, when those who experience those words, come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom. It's not up to half the kingdom, it's the kingdom. It's giving the way God gives that leads to life. Then, praise God, there will be no more curse. Revelation 22, verses 3 and 4. No more curse. Satan said, Job will curse you to your face. But it's fascinating to me that in Revelation 22, the last chapter of the Bible, we find this thought, there will be no more curse. And the very next verse says, they will see his face. Instead of cursing God to his face, Job will see his face. And God's name will be in his forehead. What does that mean? At least in a sense, doesn't mean that Job will be reflecting God. Those who are blessed will be reflecting God's face. They will see his face. And there will be no more death, no more sorrow, no more crying, no more pain. Revelation 21. And we will know more of his blessing. We will know more of his grace. We will know more of his love. And we will know more about Job's family. You know, some have suggested he had twice as many animals as before, but only the same number of kids. How could that be? Could it be that in heaven, Job will have twice as many children? If that would be the case, wouldn't Job be blessed?